Ahoy! Yesterday the devs answered some questions about the expansion, and we also got some additional information afterwards where they kinda had to clarify some things they said. So let's talk about that. Beginning with the main questions about the expansion itself. The expansion can be bought on the 3rd of October, and there will not be a bundle for the expansion along with the premium season pass, because the season pass is bought in-game and not on Steam. The PTR had some stability issues on the very first day, but those were solved, and they said that they found out what was causing this, so this likely won't be happening in the expansion. Overall, I have to say that the stability and performance of the PTR this time was very, very good. I am thinking that they did some more behind the scenes, some backend stuff changes that affect overall performance, because it was running better than live for me actually. Keep in mind, with whatever you may be seeing in the background here, I am playing on very high ping, so I still have massive desync, but that didn't affect the smoothness of the game other than that. The next set of questions here is about gearing. We were asked what the long-term goals for gear progressions are. They want to let people get really good gear quickly. They want to have less grind, less requirements to make multiple sets, and generally just want to make you have more fun and experiment around with whatever you like. The artifacts, artifact leveling, and best in slot 3 perkers are still something to work towards though. You're not going to get that all day one. We will also talk more about the future of progression in the upcoming Balance of Power episode. Somebody else said that the grind seemed very long, so kind of a counterpoint to how the first person worded their question. They said that hopefully they landed somewhere in the middle between too long and too quick, and the prismatic crafts in particular are meant to be expensive because they are pure biz crafts, so that is intentional. But they were also asked if there are any plans to reduce the amount of mats that you need to craft biz, or if they're planning to add new nodes to make farming the resources easier. They are considering a slight reduction in prismatic scarab crafting requirements, though this is not guaranteed at this point. And they're also taking a look at the influx of mithril and so on, and they may, for example, change the respawn time of those. There were some PvE questions. Somebody wanted to know if there will be Angry Earth portals or invasions with the expansion. They said that this will not be happening for Angry Earth, but they're talking about it for, I quote, another race in the future. See what that's about, so guess maybe something next year? Who knows? Also, they were asked about more PvE endgame activities. They have major plans to improve PvE and PvP experience, but they will talk about that when they talk about next year, so likely with the next roadmap, which will still be a while away. On the PvP side of things, there were quite a few questions. The first one being if the time windows for influence races on PTR, which were usually around early evening, were just for testing purposes or the intended times that they would also put onto live. These are the current intended times for live, and they'll decide on that based on PTR feedback. These are basically before most wars happen on most servers, so it would kind of make sense. They also said that these are the prime time windows of most servers. There's only a 15-minute gap between the races, and they don't want them to be too spread out, so this is on purpose, so that you can kind of go from race to race if you want to have a lot of PvP. Building upon that, somebody wanted to know what the deal with influence races for companies who own multiple territories is. The races will always be in one territory at a time. I think it is 3 per day, at least as was on the PTR, and you will have to defend all of them afterwards, obviously, against wars, invasions, and influence races. I don't quite get this reply. Because as long as you're happy with going to war, you don't need to defend influence races, you just need to defend wars and invasions, which is what is already happening. And it seems odd insofar that they have previously, in the last year, tried to implement systems that make it less effective or more difficult for companies to hold many territories. I will not say that these mechanics were particularly successful. There are still plenty of companies holding a lot of territories on the same server, but it seems like the intent, at least, was to make it more difficult to do that. And this seems to kind of just ignore that. If the wars against a company holding many territories are always very spaced out because they can kind of just work around the timers, unless the timers are random, then that would make things even easier for a strong company to hold even more territory. I actually thought that what would happen if a company owns multiple territories is that the races for that company will all be put on the same day. So you'll have the 3 races, so you have wars on the same day as well if the same company is owning places. Not sure why they're not implementing anything like that, if they're just entirely stepping away from this approach of not making one company own most of the map, or what the idea behind is here. I wish they would have explained this a little bit further. They kind of just went over this very briefly. Somebody was disappointed with the quote-unquote PvP surprise because they weren't sure what it was supposed to be and asked if it was just Eden Grove being the new territory for PvP, and saying that it feels like PvP got left behind again. So yes, the surprise was supposed to be Eden Grove, and PvP influence changes they think is going to have a major impact on the PvP experience. They still have a lot in mind for PvP, they're just not ready to talk about it. I will discuss my thoughts on the influence race in a separate video, but it seems like they really need to put something on the table for PvPers very, very soon. I think the next year's roadmap should have a higher emphasis on PvP than PvE, because this year we kind of got the reverse. And New World is a game that for many players, including me, excels in the PvP department when it comes to the combat mechanics. That's not to say that there shouldn't be any PvE content, but the balance in release schedule between the two I think needs to be better. On the more positive side for PvP, people are asking if you're screwed in OPR if you don't buy the expansion, but in Outpost Rush and in Arenas, everyone will be normalized to 675 gear score, so similar to the current gear score normalization to 600, and this includes players who don't have the expansion, so you are going to be at a very minor disadvantage at least. Though of course there are limitations to this, as you won't have a flail, you won't have artifacts, and you also won't have mounts, which actually do work in OPR. So you are still at a disadvantage, just combat-wise, not at a massive one. Somebody doubled down on that question, asking if New World is now pay to win, what's the PvP balance for people who don't buy the expansion. Scott responded to this with, I look at it as pay to continue, specifically continue growing your character. Players still get access to some of the new content like Eden Grove or OPR and arena scaling, but expansion is where the new and hot stuff is basically, and where the new content is, and certain aspects like wars, for example, you won't really be able to participate without the expansion. The next category here is kind of a what happens to certain aspects of the game, or will there be certain things in the game. First one is, will there be fresh servers, once again with a concern about a damaged economy. No, there won't be fresh start servers. It's been a long time since dupes, and the damaged economy shouldn't really be a concern at this point, and I personally also agree with what they said about this here. I think, sure, maybe there's like the 1 in 10,000 players that has some duped stuff still somewhere, but it's not massively affecting the economy at all, otherwise you would be noticing it. Most of them has probably spent most of their stuff at this point, and many of them probably don't even play anymore. You also still have the option to play on a fresh start world that was started with Brimstone Sands. Those have the no transfer in mark. What happens to Gypsum? Gypsum caches will have less use overall because they don't really scale up, but Gypsum orbs will be used for weapon matrices, for perk rerolling, and also for upgrading heart runes to 700 gear score. So you will need quite a lot of those, especially for the heart runes. I think it's 50 per heart rune. Will there be a reset to territory standing? No. And we didn't get any details about why that is or whatever, and I'm pretty sure they did at some point say that they were planning to do a reset to territory standing with an expansion. So this is unfortunate. I think this should really be happening, just based on the fact that multiple perks in there have been changed since launch or affected by changes since launch. Think, for example, housing tax, which was just drastically decreased and is no longer worth using. I think gathering speed, which was originally actually gathering yield and then got changed or fixed to actually be speed. Stuff like that. So I think they really should do the territory standing reset, and I'm really not sure why they're not doing it. Once again, they didn't elaborate on this at all. They literally just said no. The First Light Storage will remain accessible after the expansion. If you don't buy the expansion, it stays exactly the way it is. I think if you get the expansion, then it may be transferred to the new storage in the new territory. It wasn't quite clear, they kind of mentioned it, but at least either that or it stays in the old storage as well. And since First Light can't be claimed now, but Eden Grove can, that can also offset the storage loss in terms of amount that you could have had. The First Light standing and achievements will be replaced with Eden Grove standing and achievements, though it did not sound like your standing would transfer over if you had First Light standing. They're replacing First Light because First Light wasn't played much except for the fort bonus, which they moved to Weaver's Fen instead, and they're replacing it to keep players closer together on the map rather than expanding further. Somebody wanted to know what happens with named items that are currently at 590 gear score, if those need to be upgraded with umbrals before the expansion. And the original answer was yes, you should upgrade them, you can't upgrade them afterwards, but all the new ones will drop at 625 gear score. However, there was a change to that. Apparently there no longer is any need to upgrade tier 5 named items, since they will automatically be upgraded to 625 gear score post-expansion. However, note that not all tier 5 named items will be updated to gear score 625 post-expansion, but most of the recent named tier 5s will. I tried to figure out which named items don't have 625 gear score versions, but it's very hard to tell. As far as I can tell, named items from dungeons have 625, named items from brimstones have 625, and named items even from Rafflebone, even the bind and equip ones, have 625 versions. So according to that, I'm really not sure which ones will not end up being updated, or if there are certain ones like that are just too old and somewhere in the code that they can't be upgraded anymore or something. Who knows? So upgrade at your own discretion. You may not need to, but I'd honestly rather be safe than sorry. Somebody asked, what should players do between now and the expansion that is valuable in the expansion? For new players, Scott recommended stop the main story quest before entering Great Cleave, because then you get the new quest of the expansion. And if you went up to Tempest, then complete Brimstone to get new gear. Also, that would be the Hardwood slot as well. If you want to know more about how to get started as a returning player, I will link a video about that at the end. But also, they recommended that if you have nothing else to do, you can max out your crafting, refining stockpile mats to get it to 250 quickly when the expansion drops. So for example, Dave pointed out that you need 1,300 Ori ingots roughly. You need to craft that many approximately to max out your smelting. And you can work on your weapon masteries. You can collect mats that you know will be useful, like for example gypsum orbs. Those will be needed in the expansion. And you can get your ward pots, your beast ward pots, and your coding ready, Bane coding, because those will also be used in the new zone. I personally, of course, have a lot more to say about expansion prep in the coming days, so if you want to hear more about that, consider subscribing and clicking the bell to get notified. There was another question, and that was, should we not put New World on a normal hard drive? The recommended minimum read speed is 2000 megabytes per second, so you most likely need an SSD for that. Since I was talking about this during the big patch show, they did mention that they were in Seattle, and now they just said they have a team in Seattle and they wanted to go to them, so everyone's together, but they also have the team down here, quote unquote, so it doesn't seem like they're moving the operations to Seattle. Plenty more updates to come in the next days. If you'd like to support me further, you can do so on Patreon and get early trading tips in return. The list of all patrons will be updated tomorrow, so make sure that your name is however you want it to be displayed. Thanks to everyone who supports me there. And thank you for watching. Duke Sloth, out.